Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Monday, February 25th. It's 4:03 Eastern Time. Awful day for the markets. Dow Jones closed down 216 points, or about 1.5%, to 13,785. S&P down 1.8%. Back below 1,500 at 1488, and NASDAQ was down 1.4% to 3116. And that is where they all settled out. Gold closed at $15.95, up $22. Oil was down to $92.30 on West Texas Intermediate, and the 10-year Treasury saw the yield decline to 1.86%, breaking out of its recent trading range of about 1.95 to 2.05. I will just say that the House and Senate are looking beyond Friday's March 1st sequester, looking ahead to the March 27 continuing resolution, for a resolution, a CR, to keep the government open. Frankly, there's really nothing to say today as House Speaker John Boehner prepares to make a statement. I'll have a lot to say tomorrow. But for now, the risk of contagion has reemerged because of the vote in Italy. The polls closed today following a two-day vote, and it looks like chaos. With the country's highly complex electoral system, stability does not appear to be in the cards. Regardless of whatever coalition is formed, if one can be, they might need another election, you will still have major resistance to reform from the trade unions and the entrenched bureaucracy. So this morning the Italian stock market was up 4% before the polls closed. Then, as the votes began to trickle in, the market crashed, was negative briefly, so lost all 4%. It did close up about 0.7, this is the Italian market. But the early numbers were showing that Silvio Berlusconi was doing better than expected. The technocrat Prime Minister Mario Monti might not even get 10%. You need 10% to win seats in the lower house. The winning party gets a premium awarded to it, but then you have the Senate, which has bonus seats awarded or allocated on a regional basis. And so last we have, as the numbers are coming in, Pier Luigi Bersani's center-left. Now remember, they were leading in the polls. They could win the lower house, while Berlusconi, out of nowhere, and his center-right coalition could take the Senate. Comedian Beppe Grillo is a strong third. And Italy's 10-year bond rose from a yield of 4.17% this morning to close at 4.49%, a huge move on all this uncertainty. You need control of both houses, the lower house and the Senate, to govern in Italy, and it looks like it's going to be split. And Berlusconi wants to block all of Mario Monti's reforms of the past year. Berlusconi has been railing against Germany's role in forcing austerity on the EU member states, so it's just a freaking mess. A lot more on that tomorrow. In Japan, Shares there rose 2.4%, while the yen fell to a 33-month low on reports that Haruhiko Kuroda is likely to be nominated as the next Bank of Japan governor. Kuroda is currently the president of the Asian Development Bank and is seen as a supporter of monetary policy easing as a means to spur growth. Analysts said Kuroda's nomination is likely to see the Bank of Japan support Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's aggressive policy stance. In China, growth in its manufacturing sector in February pulled back from two-year highs despite racking up a fourth consecutive month of expansion, according to the HSBC flash report on the Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI. HSBC says it slipped to 50.4 in February, the lowest in 4 months, and down from January's final reading of 52.3, but it's not disastrous at all. It's growth. President Xi Jinping officially takes over on March 5th at a full session of Parliament, while the government at that time will announce its GDP target for the year, and that's expected to be 7.5% again, as it was last year. Actual growth came in at 7.8. All right, I want to focus on foreign policy. This is the Economist, cover of this week's Economist. Syria, the death of a country. The Lord knows I've written a ton on that, and since I started these nightly reviews. Secretary of State John Kerry on his first road trip. He's in Europe now, strongly hinted at a change in policy regarding Syria. In London, he said the administration, quote, is determined that the Syrian opposition is not going to be dangling in the wind, wondering where the support is. We're 2 years into this. From the editorial accompanying the Economist, so far the fighting has claimed 70,000 or more lives. Tens of thousands are missing. The regime has locked up 150,000 to 200,000 people. More than 2 million are homeless inside Syria, struggling to find food and shelter. Almost 1 million more are living in squalor over the border in the refugee camps. Suffering on such a scale is unconscionable. That was the lesson from the genocides and civil wars that scarred the last half of the past century. Yet President Barack Obama, excuse me, sorry about that. I thought I had solved it. Yet President Barack Obama has suggested that saving lives alone is not a sufficient ground for military action. Having learned in Afghanistan and Iraq how hard it is to impose peace, America is fearful of being sucked into the chaos that Mr. Assad has created. Mr. Obama was elected to win economic battles at home. He believes that a weary America should stay clear of yet another foreign disaster. That conclusion, however understandable, is mistaken. As the world superpower, America is likely to be sucked into Syria eventually. Even if the president can resist humanitarian arguments, he will find it hard to ignore his country's interest. If the fight drags on, Syria will degenerate into a patchwork of warring fiefdoms. Almost everything America wants to achieve in the Middle East will become harder. Containing terrorism, ensuring the supply of energy, and preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction. Unlike, say, the 15-year civil war in Lebanon, Syria's disintegration threatens them all. About a fifth of the rebels and some of the best organized are jihadists. They pose a threat to moderate Syrians, including Sunnis, and they could use lawless territory as a base for international terror. If they menace Israel across the Golan Heights, Israel will protect itself fiercely, which is sure to inflame Arab opinion. A divided Syria could tear Lebanon apart because the Assads will stir up their supporters there. Jordan, poor and fragile, will be destabilized by refugees and Islamists. Oil-rich Shia-majority Iraq can barely hold itself together as Iraqi Sunnis are drawn into the fray. Divisions there will only deepen. Coping with the fallout from Syria, including Mr. Assad's arsenal of chemical weapons, could complicate the aim of preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear bomb. Mr. Obama wanted to avoid Syria, but Syria will come and get him. Rachel Kleinfeld of the Truman National Security Project wrote in an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, "Why arm Syrian rebels? Let's start with Iran. The faster Syrian dictator Bashar Assad falls, the faster Iran loses its closest ally in the region and its main conduit for shipping weapons to terrorist groups that attack Israel and other U.S. allies. A Syria without Assad will further isolate Iran and could help force it to the nuclear negotiating table. Second, the war in Syria is destabilizing an already volatile region. Armed conflict has spilled into Iraq and Turkey. Refugees are creating tension in Jordan, Lebanon, and other neighboring states. Syria's chemical weapons are hard to track, and the longer the civil war rages, the greater the risk that Assad will use them on his own people, or that they end up in the hands of terrorists. Meanwhile, the rebels aren't waiting for Washington to decide. They're getting arms where they can, often from private individuals in Gulf countries that support the most radical Islamists within the rebel factions. In other words, the longer we stand aside, the more power Sunni factions and rebel groups engaging in war crimes gain over more secular and nationalist groups. The latter are disgusted with our inaction. We will have few friends in Syria, a crucial country in a bad neighborhood, when this bloodletting is over. The young people spearheading the Arab Spring are trying to decide what America stands for, whether it cares about their human rights and empowerment or is merely seeking cheap global oil and easy alliances. And action in Syria is not good for the U.S. in a region where more than 60% of the population is under age 30. America can lose this generation for the next 50 years if it is not on their side now. I've been saying that for 2 freaking years. This whole war is on Obama and the consequences of it. In Egypt, President Mohamed Morsi scheduled parliamentary elections for April 22nd onward. There's 4 different stages into June. Opposition leader Mohamed El-Baradei called for a boycott, saying he will not be part of an act of deception, i.e. a rigged election that legitimizes Egypt's sham democracy, as he puts it. The opposition also says elections should not be held until dispute over the new constitution is resolved, the constitution produced by the Islamist-dominated assembly. Other opposition figures, though, say it does no good to boycott the elections, and I agree. If it's a sham, let the world see it as such. In South Korea, Park Geun-hye, daughter of Park Chung-hee, the military leader who ran the country until he was assassinated 34 years ago, was sworn in today as South Korea's first female president, and in her inaugural address said, quote, "North Korea's recent nuclear test is a challenge to the survival and future of the Korean people, and there should be no mistake that the biggest victim will be none other than North Korea itself." In Afghanistan, President Hamid Karzai ordered all U.S. Special Operations Forces to leave the strategically important province of Wardak in 2 weeks, alleging that they had been involved in the torture and murder of innocent people. He cited no evidence or judicial readings. He's such an ass. Wardak borders Kabul and is used by the Taliban in some sections to infiltrate the capital. In Mali, the Chadian military claims to have killed over 90 Islamist militants in a battle in the rugged north of the country, acknowledging it lost 23 of its own soldiers. Chad is providing 2,000 troops to fight alongside the French and Malian forces. It's estimated the Islamists have 2,000 to 3,000 fighters that are now in the rugged mountains. In accepting a new presidential term on Sunday, 81-year-old Raul Castro announced that it would be his last, and for the first time he tapped a rising star, Miguel Diaz-Canel, to be his top lieutenant and possible successor. "This will be my last term," Castro said. Castro also said he hopes to establish 2-term limits and age caps for political offices, including the presidency, though he set no specific age. In a 35-minute speech, Castro did scotch any idea that the country would soon abandon socialism, saying he had not assumed the presidency in order to destroy Cuba's system. "I was not chosen to be president to restore capitalism to Cuba," he said. "I was elected to defend, maintain, and continue to perfect socialism, not destroy it." I note the passing over the weekend of Paul McElhaney, Chief Executive and Chairman of the Board of the McElhaney Company, makers of Tabasco sauce. He was 68. He joined the family company in 1967 and oversaw for 13 years of record growth in sales and earnings. A great, great product. Best of America. Sympathies to the McElhaney family. College basketball, Wake Forest kicked butt, beat number 2 Miami 80-65 on Saturday. And in the new AP poll just released, Indiana is almost unanimous number 1, but Gonzaga is number 2, highest ever rank for that school. Congratulations to them. And finally, a quick this day in baseball item. 1972. On this date, St. Louis Cardinals traded Steve Carlton to the Phillies for pitcher Rick Wise. That's all for today. I'll be back with you on Tuesday. All kinds of talk on sequestration, I promise. Take care.